Hello, welcome back to Stop Loss with Spencer, episode 15.1. That's right, we're going to do a three-part series for episode 15. And 15.1 is going to focus on how to market stop loss and specifically marketing stop loss through the GA channel. 15.2, we'll talk about if TPAs were doing your stop loss marketing. And 15.3 will be what would happen, how would it work if you did it directly, okay? There could be a 15.4 with PlanSite. I'm not gonna sell you guys on it. I'm not gonna make a video and reveal all of our amazing secrets, but if you're interested in a fourth way, give me a shout, okay? So today, how to market stop loss using a general agent or a GA. So what is a general agent? A general agent is a wholesaler. That could also be referred to as a broker's broker or an intermediary. Either way, those four terms are effectively interchangeable, but a GA, a general agent, is a wholesaler of stop loss. So what that means is they're independent, okay? They could represent upwards of 20 to 25 carriers independently. They're not tied to them, they're not owned by them, they're not a captive agent, meaning they can only sell one or two. They are independent, and whoever they are appointed with, depending on their own relationships, they will independently represent a number of stop loss carriers on behalf of your client at one time. Many carriers I mentioned, so rather than you having to develop your own relationships, you go to the GA and they effectively work as a single source for access to those carriers. They also do not take risk, at least from the stop loss perspective, and what I mean by that is they're not a carrier. So the difference in if you were to go to a direct carrier or an MGU, they are taking the risk, they are taking over the ownership of the claims. Whereas a GA is, again, that intermediary without actually assuming any of the stop loss risk themselves. And how are they paid? They're paid by a fee for placement of that stop loss. There's different forms of payment, and we'll touch on it over here, but they, of course, are compensated for their involvement in the transaction. So what are some pros? I will be objective about this. For those of you that know me, I've worked for a GA in the past. I've worked for a direct carrier in the past, and I've also worked for a broker. So I will be objective in the pros and cons of each one of these solutions. They all have their merits. They all have their potential downsides. It's up to you to determine subjectively whether or not you think the pros outweigh the cons. But here are some pros of what you would typically assume when utilizing a GA, the value that you're getting from that distribution channel. Market access. We touched on that earlier, of course. You may only have a handful of relationships with carriers. The GA is obviously going to have a number of additional relationships that you may or may not have, but they're giving you a one-stop shop for carrier access, okay? There also should be, of course, but the best GAs, of course, are providing you expertise. They are subject matter experts. There's many GAs that specifically focus on stop loss. So they effectively go, a mile deep, but only an inch wide, presumably in the value that they bring. But they are subject matter experts when it comes to marketing, finding the right value, finding the appropriate coverage for that particular client's risk, getting through the negotiations, the binding process, etc. They are the experts, and that's what you engage them ultimately for. They also have leverage. This is really important with you smaller agencies that don't have a big name, don't have tons and tons of millions of premium with those carriers. So you lack adequate leverage to get them in certain circumstances to give you better quotes than they might otherwise, or even to get them potentially to pay attention to your RFPs because the bigger carriers might say, well, that's a relatively small fish and we've got to focus on the bigger shops. When you engage a GA, they effectively leverage their volume and their blocks of business with those carriers on the behalf of your client. This is debatable, but one of the value propositions that they're bringing to the table is the ease, right? You're offloading or outsourcing the marketing to that GA, so you don't have to think about it, other than maybe telling them a little bit about the client, giving them the data, telling them roughly what you want in terms of the solution. The ease is the broker or the broker's broker, the GA, then takes that off of your plate. There's also the potential for time savings, again debatable, depends on the circumstances, depends on the GA, but that ease would include a time element as well. And lastly, I mentioned that, my battery didn't go dead. Lastly, I mentioned they don't take risk. However, they do have errors and omissions protection for the services that they provide. If they misplace a group, if they inadequately bind coverage, if they miss something in the marketing efforts, if they misrepresent something, there's a number of reasons when E&O protection could be valuable to you as a broker. And so yes, they don't take specific risk on the stop loss or specific to the stop loss, but they do provide errors and omissions protection in case of a dispute. Okay, it's not exhaustive, that E&O protection, but it is there. So cons, potential cons, right? This is all debatable. This is all relative to the individual or the case itself, but you do give up the opportunity for control. So since you're outsourcing those efforts, you're also then becoming dependent upon that GA to make sure they're doing the job well. So you lose a little bit of control of choice of the markets, the relationships that you have, negotiations as you get further down the line. You're outsourcing all of that to them. They're a third party effectively in the transaction. So you do, of course, when you insert a layer in between you and the carrier, you lose a little bit of control, potentially. Okay. Visibility. This is also potential less visibility because you might get results come back 2 or 3 weeks later. You don't necessarily get a peek into the process as they're negotiating on your client's behalf. So there is possibility that maybe they don't bring everything to the table. Maybe you don't get to see some of the interactions and negotiations that preceded you getting the results handed to you. So there is the potential, again, for less visibility. Notice I keep using that word potential. Potential for revenue loss, okay? I won't get too deep into the specifics and I will tread lightly in terms of how the GAs are compensated and whether or not they're compensated in multiple ways and the visibility of that compensation. But if you were a big broker that has large leverage and can put together your own internal direct marketing efforts, there is the potential for a revenue loss, okay? And again, I'm going to shy away from the nitty-gritty of that. I don't think it's really pertinent to this, but just keep in mind, you might be leaving something on the table in terms of bonuses, overrides, commissions, etc. if you're engaging a third party who also needs to be compensated appropriately for their services. Last but not least, this depends on the broker, the producer themselves, or that shop, how much you actually value direct relationship with those carriers, right? So if somebody is marketing on behalf of your client, you may lose with that intermediation of a GA, you may lose some of that closeness that you have with those carrier reps that you like doing business with. It doesn't mean you can't go have drinks with them or play golf or have lunch or whatever, invite them in to tell their story directly to you, but you'll probably be speaking to them less, interacting with them less. You may like that, okay, but that could also potentially be perceived as a con if you really value building deep relationships with the carriers, okay? So again, high level, a handful of pros and cons. What is a GA? This is 15.1. Episode 15.2, we'll talk about if the TPA was marketing on behalf of your client, but this is an introduction. If you've never heard of a GA, never heard of a wholesaler, not my opinion, not telling you what to do, but I'd like to at least introduce you to the idea and what you may get and what you may lose if you're going with the GA as a distribution channel. So guys, I hope you stay tuned for 15.2. I'm going to probably be wearing the same jacket, so don't hate. I'm shooting it on the same day. But either way, I really appreciate your engagement. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. And tell me if I'm wrong. Bye.